I've always believed that owning a lake was like holding a secret piece of heaven. Early mornings, when the mist clings to the water like a soft blanket, and the only sound is the quiet splash of a fish breaking the surface, it's peaceful. I'd sit on my dock, coffee in hand, thinking life couldn't get better. But peace is fragile, especially when an HOA decides they have more rights to your lake than you do. It started small, at first just the usual notices tucked under my door. Community meeting, they said. Discussion about property enhancements. I didn't think much of it until the notices started stacking up like bricks, each one heavier than the last. There was always a new excuse: algae control, safety improvements, a project for the good of everyone. But something about the way the HOA president smiled in those meetings. It was the kind of smile that said, "We're going to take what's yours, and you won't even see it coming." Name was Karen. Of course, her name was Karen. She dressed in tennis whites, even in winter, with a clipboard permanently glued to her hand. She would stroll along the edge of my property like a queen inspecting her territory, nodding to the contractors she brought along, making them feel important while ignoring me entirely. I remember the first time she stepped onto my dock without asking. I froze, my heart raced. "This is my lake," I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a polite cough. She looked at me like I was an annoying fly buzzing in her sunlight. Then came the notice that changed everything. A blueprint for a community power plant on my lake, my sanctuary. The paper felt heavy in my hands, the edges sharp like it had been cut just to pierce me. I read it again and again, hoping my eyes were deceiving me. No, they wanted to build a power plant right in the middle of my water. Overnight, my peaceful mornings, my fishing, my sunsets, everything I loved was under threat. I called the HOA office, trying to reason. "There must be some mistake," I said, but the voice on the other end was firm, bureaucratic, unmoving. "All permits are approved. Construction begins next month." Just like that, my world shifted. I remember staring at the lake for hours that evening, the water reflecting the sunset like molten gold, and feeling a quiet, growing rage. How dare they? How dare anyone think they could take what belonged to me? Neighbors started whispering. "Did you see what the HOA is planning? Are they really putting a power plant there?" Their voices were filled with awe, fear, and a little excitement, as if someone else's life was entertainment for them. I hated it. I hated feeling helpless while everyone else gossiped. Every hammer strike planned on my property felt like a threat to my very soul. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked along the shoreline, fingertips skimming the water, and tried to imagine a world where they didn't get away with this. The moonlight reflected on the surface, fractured by tiny waves, and in those cracks I felt a spark of resolve. I wouldn't just watch. I couldn't. I'd spent too many mornings, too many years building this life, this sanctuary. And now it was under siege. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know what I would do. But I knew one thing for certain. By the time this is over, the HOA would learn that my lake was not just property. It was my life, my home, my heart. And no amount of bureaucracy, no stack of permits, no smug smile from a woman in tennis whites would take that away without a fight. The calm of my lake that night was deceiving. The storm was coming, and when it hit, it wasn't going to be gentle. The next morning, I woke up to the sun slicing through my blinds, the lake looking innocent, calm, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. That blueprint wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war. The HOA had decided to play God with my lake, and I hadn't even gotten a say. I went outside, coffee in hand, to inspect the area where they planned to build. I could almost see the future, a concrete monstrosity rising from the water, humming machinery, and the peaceful ripples replaced by industrial chaos. My heart sank. I could feel every fish, every plant, every ripple of water shivering under the thought of it. And worse, they had the audacity to call it a community improvement. That afternoon, I received a call from one of the contractors. "We're scheduled to start next week," he said casually, as if he were telling me about a lawn mowing service. My blood ran cold. I asked if he had a permit. "All official," he said. "HOA approved it." Just like that, they made it legal. They made it inevitable, or at least they thought they did. I spent the rest of the day packing along the dock, trying to figure out how to stop them. I remembered my grandfather's words, "If you care about something, you don't just complain, you fight for it." I fought for every inch of this property, every tree, every sunset. I wasn't about to hand it over to a bunch of bureaucrats in polos and khakis. The HOA president, Karen, decided to make a personal appearance that evening. She arrived with her clipboard like a general inspecting her battlefield. Contractors followed, measuring tape in hand, surveying stakes planted in the soft mud. She looked at me with that same smug smile, the one that said she already won. "Don't worry," she said, like I was a child afraid of the dark. "This is for everyone's benefit." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. The meeting escalated quickly. I tried reasoning with her, explaining the environmental impact, the disruption, the fact that this was my lake, not theirs. Every argument I made, she countered with legal jargon, permits, and condescending nods. She didn't hear me. She didn't have to. The outcome was already written in her mind. The only thing left was for them to execute it. I left the meeting more furious than ever. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, the late afternoon sun burning my eyes. I could feel the rage building inside me, a fire that refused to die down. And in that rage, a plan began to form. I couldn't stop them the normal way. Permits, HOA meetings, lawyers, they had all that stacked against me, but there had to be another way. I had spent nights by this lake, knew every inch of it, every inlet, every drain. If they wanted a power plant, fine. But they weren't going to build it on my terms, not without consequences. The suspense gnawed at me. Every sound outside, the distant hammer, the crunch of boots on gravel, felt like a countdown. I felt like a character in a thriller, watching the enemy move closer to my home. And I realized something terrifying. If I didn't act, by next week there would be nothing left of the lake I loved. No ripples, no fish, no peaceful mornings, just steel and concrete. By the time night fell, I had made my decision. I couldn't sit back and watch them destroy everything. I needed to plan, to prepare, to take control. The HOA thought this was a battle they could win with bureaucracy and permits. They didn't know me. They didn't know my lake, and soon they would learn. As I walked along the shore, the wind brushing across the water, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow night, this lake fights back." That's when I understood something crucial. The calm before the storm wasn't just about the lake. It was about me, about standing up to people who thought power gave them the right to destroy what belonged to others. And the storm was just beginning. The next morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The HOA wasn't going to pause, rethink, or suddenly realize they were wrong. They had their permits, their contractors, their smug smiles. But I had something my lake, my knowledge of every inch of it, and a growing fire inside me that refused to be ignored. I walked into the HOA office, heart pounding, hands clenched. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as if they were warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to face them, to look Karen in the eyes and make her understand that I wasn't just a nuisance. They were trespassing on my life. Karen greeted me with that same false sweetness. "So glad you could make it," she said, waving her clipboard like a shield. Behind her, the board members whispered, taking notes, nodding at each other as if they were witnessing a courtroom drama starring me as the defendant. I swallowed hard. I needed to stay calm or they would smell fear. "I'm here about the power plant," I started, my voice steady despite the anger twisting inside me. "This is my lake. You can't just build whatever you want on it." Karen tilted her head, the perfect picture of condescension. "We have every legal right," she said, her words smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "All permits are approved. Construction begins next week. It's for the benefit of the community." I felt a laugh bubbling up, but I swallowed it. Benefit of the community? My lake was more than community benefit. It was my sanctuary. My mornings, my memories, every sunset I'd watched bleed into the water. It was all being threatened. "I'm not asking," I said, stepping closer. "I'm telling you, you need to stop this. There are ways to resolve this without destroying everything I've built here." Karen smiled again. It was almost mocking. "Resolution? We've already resolved this. Legally, ethically, morally, we're in the right. You're the one resisting progress." The contractors behind her shifted nervously, glancing at each other. I noticed the hesitation in their eyes, the flicker of doubt. Even they must have felt that something was wrong with putting a power plant in the middle of someone's private lake. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Do you understand what you're doing? The environmental impact, the fish, the water quality, the entire ecosystem." Karen waved her hand dismissively. Details. This is bigger than you, bigger than the lake. You'll thank us someday." My blood boiled. Bigger than me? Bigger than my home? I realized then that reason wasn't going to work. Logic wasn't going to work. They were blind to everything except their own authority, and that meant I had to escalate. I left the meeting, heart racing, hands shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline. Every step along the dock felt heavy, as if the water itself were warning me. I looked at my lake, calm and unsuspecting, and a thought hit me. They think they own it now. They think it's theirs to control, but they're wrong, so wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the shoreline, tracing my fingers through the cool water, feeling the life within it. Fish darted under my hand, tiny waves kissed my ankles, and I realized something crucial. The lake was alive, and I would fight to protect it. Every moment the HOA thought they were winning, I was planning. Every permit, every legal document, every smug smile, they were all just obstacles. And obstacles I knew were meant to be overcome. I scribbled notes in the dark, mapped out every inlet, every drain, every weak point that could give me leverage. My mind raced with ideas, none illegal, at least not yet, but every one designed to make them pause, to make them hesitate, to make them understand that the lake wasn't theirs to command. By the time the moon rose high, casting silver light over the still water, I had made a promise to myself. Tomorrow, I start fighting back. And by the time this is over, they will wish they had never set foot on my property. The calm of the lake that night felt deceptive. It wasn't peace, it was anticipation. Every ripple, every whisper of wind through the trees felt like a countdown. The HOA thought they were in control. They thought bureaucracy would shield them. But the night had shown me something else. I was ready, and my lake was ready. By the next day, the lake didn't feel the same anymore. It looked calm, sure, but now I knew that calm was a lie. Beneath the surface, everything was under threat. Every ripple felt like a countdown. Every passing truck made my chest tighten. I stopped trying to sleep. Sleep was pointless when every time I closed my eyes, I saw concrete pouring into my water. So instead, I stayed awake. I researched. I read documents I didn't even know existed. Water rights, property easements, drainage access, old county maps that hadn't been updated in decades. That's when I found it. Buried in a yellowed document from years ago was a single line that made my heart stop. The lake had a controlled drainage system, installed long before the HOA ever existed. It was designed for flood control. Emergency use only. And according to the records, it was still legally mine. I stared at the screen for a long time, too long. My reflection looked back at me like someone I barely recognized. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about stopping a power plant. This was about crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. If I used that drainage system, there would be no pretending anymore. No polite emails. No, let's talk about this. It would be open war. I walked outside and sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water. The lake didn't know what was coming. Fish swam lazily beneath the surface. The wind brushed across the water like a whisper, and for a moment I almost convinced myself to walk away. To let the HOA win. To let them take it. But then I heard construction equipment in the distance. The sound echoed across the water like a threat, and something inside me hardened. That evening, a neighbor stopped by. He leaned against the fence, eyes darting toward the lake like it might overhear us. "They're bringing in more equipment tomorrow," he said quietly. "Big stuff." Tomorrow. That word sat heavy in my chest, because tomorrow meant once they started, stopping them would be impossible. Once concrete touched water, the lake I loved would be gone forever. I waited until nightfall, the kind of night where everything feels closer, louder. I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the far end of the property, where most people didn't even know the drainage access existed. It was hidden behind brush and old fencing, forgotten by time, just like the document I'd found. When I brushed the dirt away and saw the metal control valve, my hands started shaking. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. This was real. One turn, that's all it would take. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I stood there, heart pounding, listening to my own breathing. I thought about the HOA president's smile, about her calling this progress, about the way she talked about my lake like it was already hers. That's when the fear faded, and something colder replaced it. I went back inside and started planning. Every detail mattered. Timing. Noise, visibility. I checked weather forecasts, wind direction, moonlight. I even rehearsed the walk in my head, step by step, like a soldier preparing for a mission he might not come back from the same. This wasn't revenge, this was survival. Around midnight, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing when my phone buzzed. A message from the HOA group chat. Construction confirmed, final inspection in the morning. My stomach dropped, morning. That meant tonight was my last chance. If I waited, I'd lose everything. I stood up slowly, like if I moved too fast, I might change my mind. I put on dark clothes. No music, no lights, just silence. The kind of silence where every decision echoes. As I stepped outside, the lake reflected the stars like nothing was wrong, like it trusted me, and that nearly broke me. I whispered into the dark, "I'm doing this for you." Because by sunrise, the HOA would discover something they never expected. And once the water started moving, there would be no stopping what came next. The lake was quiet that night, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every tiny sound feel like an alarm. I walked toward the drainage valve, heart hammering in my chest, flashlight in hand, my breath visible in the cool night air. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself knew what I was about to do and was trying to warn me off. I checked the perimeter one last time. No cars, no flashlights in the distance, just me, the stars, and the dark water stretching out before me. I crouched low, brushing aside overgrown brush, the metal valve glinting faintly in the moonlight. This was it. One turn and the lake's water would be mine to control. My hand shook as I reached for it. The air smelled of wet earth and algae. My mind raced. What if I got caught? What if someone called the cops? What if I ruined everything I'd worked for and for nothing? I shook my head. No, I couldn't let fear win, not tonight. I turned the valve slowly. The sound was almost imperceptible at first, a faint hiss like the lake itself sighing in disbelief. Then I heard it, water starting to move, flowing through channels, draining away from the lake like someone pulling a giant plug. My stomach dropped, my pulse raced. This was happening. My lake, my life, was reacting to my decision. The shadows seemed to move around me, the trees whispering in the wind. I froze, listening. Every crunch of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart leap. Was someone there? Had Karen finally realized what I was doing? The first trickle of water grew into a rush, spilling across the bank, carrying mud and debris with it. Fish jumped, desperate, flopping in shallow water. I winced but knew I couldn't stop now. Not when I was this close. The lake had no choice but to obey. Then came the unexpected. A sudden noise behind me, a snapping branch. I froze. My flashlight caught a glint of something moving just at the edge of the tree line. My throat went dry. "Who's there?" I whispered, but there was no answer. Only the sound of the water draining, relentless, unstoppable. I realized it didn't matter. Even if someone saw me, it was too late. The lake was leaving, flowing through its hidden channels, emptying, revealing the mud, the roots, the bottom that had been hidden for decades. And with it, the power plant plans, the permits, the smugness of the HOA president. All of it would be exposed in a way they never expected. For a moment, I allowed myself a grim smile. I could almost picture Karen standing on the dock tomorrow morning, clipboard in hand, jaw dropping as she realized that the lake, the very lake she thought she could command, was gone, not destroyed, not ruined, just returned to the state where she had no authority. The water continued to flow, faster now, rushing through the old drainage channels. The mud bubbled and hissed, the fish scattered, and I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it made my hands tremble. This wasn't just a fight for property anymore. This was a fight for respect. A fight for every calm morning I had ever spent by this water. I crouched low, watching the progress, listening to the hiss and rush, feeling the tension unwind in a strange mix of exhilaration and terror. And then, another noise. Louder this time, footsteps, someone approaching fast. My heart skipped. I ducked behind a tree, breathing shallow, eyes straining. A neighbor's flashlight swept across the bank. I held my breath. They paused, muttered to themselves, then turned away. My chest heaved with relief. The night was mine. The lake was mine. By the time I finished adjusting the final valves, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The water had retreated far enough that the bottom of the lake, long hidden, was exposed like a battlefield after a storm. I stepped back, muddy, exhausted, but triumphant. I had done it. And as I watched the dark outlines of the lakebed in the early morning light, a thought crossed my mind. Tomorrow, the HOA would wake up to chaos. Their power plant, their permits, their plans, all of it would be confronted by reality. My reality. I wiped the mud from my hands and whispered into the cold morning air. This is my lake, and no one, not you, not them, will ever forget it. I woke to the soft glow of dawn, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. For a moment it felt normal, peaceful, the kind of morning I used to love, but then I looked at the lake and everything changed. The water was gone. Not a trickle remained where it should have been. The lake I had fished in, swum in, and watched in silence for years was now an exposed battlefield of mud, roots, and fish flopping helplessly. I could hear birds squawking, startled, and the faint sound of neighbors screaming in disbelief from the far end of the property. I stepped onto the dock, mud squelching under my boots, and I saw them. The HOA, contractors, and a few gossiping neighbors had arrived early, and chaos had already begun. Karen, clipboard in hand, was frozen in the middle of the bank, eyes wide, jaw slack, pointing at the empty lake like it had personally insulted her. This isn't possible," she shrieked, her voice cracking like glass. Her contractors scrambled, tripping over equipment, slipping in the mud, shouting at each other, completely unprepared for what had happened. The scene was surreal, almost cinematic in its absurdity. I stayed hidden at first, watching. Every expression on Karen's face told a story: confusion, rage, disbelief, humiliation. She barked orders, waved her arms, called names, but nothing worked. The lake had disappeared overnight. Their power plant had nowhere to go. Their permits meant nothing. One of the contractors slipped entirely into the mud, landing with a splash, cursing under his breath. A neighbor standing nearby stifled laughter. I couldn't help but smile, just a little. It was poetic justice, the smugness of bureaucracy crashing into reality. Karen stomped toward the dock, mud sucking at her shoes. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice trembling with fury. Her eyes scanned the empty lake, darting to me, but I stayed invisible, blending with the shadows. I could feel adrenaline surging through my veins. The lake was mine again, even if just temporarily. And I realized something incredible. For the first time, I wasn't just defending property. I was sending a message. To Karen, to the HOA, to anyone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. Neighbors started gathering, whispering, recording videos on their phones. Word was spreading fast. The spectacle was too good to ignore. Every flinch, every slip, every frantic attempt to salvage the power plant was being documented. And all the while, I stayed back, letting the chaos unfold. Karen screamed something about lawsuits, about authority, about legal rights. But her words were swallowed by the sound of rushing water from the drainage channels still moving behind the lake. The sight was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Mud, fish, weeds, everything that had been hidden beneath the placid surface was now exposed. One brave contractor tried to argue, we can reroute it. But Karen cut him off, voice high and panicked. "No, you can't fix this. This is catastrophic." And she was right. Catastrophic. Not for me, but for her ego, for her authority, for the illusion that she could control the lake. I finally stepped forward, muddy boots sinking into the soil, hands raised. "Morning," I said casually. The words were simple, but they hit harder than any argument. "Looks like the lake had other plans." Her face went pale, the board members whispered frantically. Contractors froze mid-step, and for a moment I felt something I hadn't in years, absolute control. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She was speechless, staring at the exposed lake, realizing that nothing she had done, no permit, no meeting, no plan, could change reality. And in that silence, the message was clear: my lake, my rules. I stepped back to the dock and looked at the horizon, breathing in the morning air. The sun caught the muddy water, sparkling like broken glass. Everything was quiet now, except for the whispers, the gasps, and the occasional splash of a struggling fish. I couldn't laugh, not yet, but a smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. The HOA had learned a lesson whether they liked it or not. And the chaos, the panic, the sheer disbelief, they hadn't even seen the best part yet. Because this was only the beginning. By the time the sun had fully risen, the lake was a mess. But it was my mess, and more importantly, my victory. Mud, weeds, exposed roots, and fish flopping helplessly across the lake bed stretched out before me like a silent statement. I should have felt relief. I should have been satisfied, but I knew this wasn't over. It never is with the HOA. By mid-morning, calls started flooding my phone. First, it was neighbors whispering and congratulating me. Then emails, formal, angry, and threatening. And finally, the call I knew would come, the HOA president herself, Karen. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she spat through the phone, voice shaking with fury. "You've destroyed property. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." I let out a slow breath. "Good morning, Karen," I said, voice calm, almost too calm. "You should check your lake before sending threats." Her screeching silence on the other end was priceless, but I didn't have time to enjoy it. Soon, letters arrived, lawyers showed up, and suddenly I was in the middle of the kind of legal nightmare most people only see in movies. Papers stacked high on my desk, emails marked urgent, phone calls I couldn't answer fast enough, and every one of them screamed the same thing: "You're in trouble." I knew better. I had done my research. I had documentation of the drainage system, water rights, even old permits dating back decades proving the lake had always been under my control. The HOA had the permits for a power plant, yes, but those permits didn't overwrite the law, didn't overwrite property rights, didn't overwrite the fact that the lake was mine. And now they were learning the hard way. Court dates were set. The tension was unbearable. I sat in the courtroom listening to their lawyers talk about community benefit, progress, and necessity, and I had to bite back laughter. Their words were hollow, meaningless in the face of reality. My lake existed. Their power plant did not. Karen tried everything. Emotional appeals, dramatic reenactments, citing every minor regulation she could find. She even brought up my late-night operation, implying sabotage. But the judge, a calm, sharp-eyed woman, didn't flinch. She listened, she reviewed my documents, she asked questions no one could dodge. And then came the moment of silence. That long, tense pause while she reviewed everything again, pen tapping, eyes scanning, her face unreadable. I could feel my own heart thumping in my chest, every nerve electric. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she spoke. Based on the documentation provided and the evidence of property rights, the court finds in favor of the property owner. Relief crashed over me, almost too sudden, too powerful. Karen's face went pale. She sputtered, trying to argue, but the gavel hit the desk, echoing through the courtroom like a thunderclap. It was over. I had won. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed me. Neighbors congratulated me, cameras flashed, and somewhere I could swear I heard Karen muttering about "this isn't the end." But in that moment it didn't matter. The lake was mine. The peace, the calm, the mornings I loved, all had been defended. And yet there was something else, a subtle satisfaction I hadn't expected. The HOA had thought rules, permits, and bureaucracy would shield them, but reality had no permits. Reality had water, mud, and someone willing to fight for what mattered. The chaos, the panic, the frantic phone calls, they hadn't just been a spectacle. They had been proof. Proof that no amount of power could replace common sense, no amount of bureaucracy could replace respect for what is truly yours. I went back to the lake that evening. The water had settled back into its natural flow, birds returned, and the gentle ripples reflected the golden sunset. The mud and debris were still there, a reminder of the storm I had weathered. But I didn't see destruction. I saw victory. I saw justice. Karen's words still echoed in my mind. "You'll regret this." But as I watched the lake shimmer in the sunset, I knew something she would never understand. Some things aren't hers to take. Some battles, no matter how small or messy, are worth every sleepless night. And the lake, my lake, had survived. The lake had finally settled. The mud, the exposed roots, the chaos from the night I drained it. The storm had passed, and now the water mirrored the sky, calm and serene, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I could still feel the echoes of that night, the adrenaline, the fear, the exhilaration. My lake had survived, and so had I. I walked along the shoreline, barefoot this time, letting the cool water lap over my toes. Every ripple felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that life continues even after the fiercest storms. Birds returned to their perches, fish darted beneath the surface, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded here. The HOA never fully recovered from that day. Karen tried to maintain her composure, but everyone could see the cracks. Contractors stopped calling, lawyers hesitated, and the neighbors, finally stopped whispering behind my back. Now they watched with respect, a little awe, and maybe even fear. One morning, as I sipped coffee on the dock, Karen showed up. She didn't have her clipboard this time. Just a stiff posture, tight smile, mud still on her shoes from the night the lake had fought back. "You did a lot of damage," she said, voice strained, almost like she was testing it. I smiled calm, letting the moment hang in the air. "Damage or justice?" I asked, gesturing to the water. "The lake's fine, the lake always recovers." She stared at me, blinking. I could almost see her brain spinning, trying to figure out how her plans had failed so completely. I didn't say another word. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any argument, louder than any lawsuit. Over the next few weeks, life returned to a rhythm that felt almost sacred. I fished in the mornings, watched the sunsets, and hosted friends and neighbors without fear of a bulldozer interrupting the peace. Every ripple of water felt earned, every bird's call a little victory. And yet I couldn't ignore the lessons learned. I realized that peace is fragile, that standing up to bureaucracy, to people who think rules and permits give them power over your life, is messy, stressful, and exhausting, but necessary. Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to take bold, unexpected action. I remembered the fear I felt that night, the kind that makes your hands shake, your heart pound, and your mind scream at you to stop. But I also remembered the moment I turned the valve, the rush of water, the thrill of reclaiming what was mine. And I understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. Neighbors still talk about that night. Some whisper in awe, some shake their heads, and a few even joke that the lake drained itself out of revenge. I smile when I hear it. It's a story now, a legend, a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, no matter how impossible it seems. One evening I walked the dock and looked across the water. The sun was setting, the sky ablaze with orange and pink, reflecting perfectly on the calm lake. I took a deep breath, letting the silence fill me. My lake had survived the storm, the bureaucracy, the threats, and I had survived too. Karen never returned after that. The HOA learned quickly that some things aren't theirs to command. Authority can bend, rules can be rewritten, but nature and determination has its own power. And sometimes a quiet lake can teach lessons no meeting or lawyer ever could. I lifted my hands, letting the wind brush over them, and whispered to myself, almost like a promise, "This lake is ours, and no one will take it from us again." The water lapped gently against the shore as if agreeing. Life moved on. Birds sang. Fish swam. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known I could feel, a calm born not just from victory, but from knowing I had fought for what mattered most and had come out stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Sometimes the smallest battles leave the biggest marks. And sometimes they remind you that courage, patience, and a willingness to fight, even against the impossible, can restore more than just a lake. They restore your life. As I watched the sun sink below the horizon, the lake shimmering like molten gold, I knew one thing for certain. This was home, my lake, my rules, my victory. And no storm, no HOA, no obstacle could ever take that away. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.